Parsha Vayishlach, which is it's famous because it was the first fixed wrestling match in history. That people always talk about the Vince McMahon and the wrestling is fixed, right? But the struggle between Yaakov and the angel was really the first fixed wrestling match. Because what is an angel? An angel is a pure force of God. So God sets the rheostat of the angel. If he sets it up 2 degrees, he crushes Yaakov like a bug. And if he sets it down 2 degrees, he's helpless, and Yaakov destroys him. Right? So God has to set it at exactly the right point so that Yaakov has the struggle and becomes victorious. Right? Giving Yaakov a message that we spoke about this week, that who was he fighting? He was fighting the angel of Esav, his brother. And it was the night before he was going to meet his brother. He was on his way home. And so the message was, you will have a tremendous struggle, but you will be victorious. And know that as you go into this meeting with your brother, go into it with confidence. Right? Because if you can struggle with his angel and win, you can certainly come out okay. And so Yaakov does in the end, and it's a good meeting. Bereshis introduces to 4 institutions of remembrance. They're called ois, a sign, right? Shabbos, the rainbow, bris milah, circumcision, and the gid hanashe of our pasuk, the sciatic nerve. Right? In this parsha, the angel touches Yaakov on the nerve that runs down the back of the leg and causes him tremendous pain, injures the nerve, right? And the Torah says that to this day the children of Yaakov do not eat from this part of the animal, the sciatic nerve. And all Ashkenazi butchers won't serve that part of the animal that has the nerve in it, which is the hind quarter. There are some Sephardi butchers who know the art of removing the nerve. It's not easy to do because it starts as a thick cord and becomes progressively thinner and thinner and thinner as it stretches out, so that the nerve that comes out of the spinal column can be quite thick, but the nerve at the end of your finger can be spread out into very fine points, right? So there are Sephardi butchers that know this science, that have this tradition, and know how to remove the sciatic nerve, and they can eat that portion of the animal when it's removed. But in this week's portion, we're told why we don't eat it. Right? It's because of what happened to Yaakov. Right? Shabbos is observed only by Jews. Its message, however, is entirely relevant to non-Jews whose moral calling will remain obscured unless they can internalize the central idea of Shabbos, of Hashem as the creator of all things. That's what the meaning of Shabbos is. That God created the world in 7 days, and only God created the world in 7 days. When man understands himself to be a product of a designer, what's the popular term now? Intelligent design. Okay. It's a popular term for replacing God in schools, because schools don't want to talk about God. Yeah. If he understands that he is the product of intelligent design, a designer, he can then try to understand the design and what the design is, and there might be a design for the universe, right? And what his role is. He has a purpose. It's not random. He has a purpose to try and play his role in this design. Now, he will never understand the mind of the designer, but he'll get hints if he examines carefully, and especially if the designer decides to leave him some information. The builder of do you know the story about the builder of the Brooklyn Bridge? You probably know the story.
Who was the builder?
The engineer who built the Brooklyn Bridge. The fellow who built the Brooklyn Bridge, it's actually a tragic story. Both he and his son were both engineers and architects, and they were both destroyed, actually, by the building of the bridge. The father got the bends from going too deep in the water in a unpressurized suit, and basically destroyed some of his organs, internal organs. And he was the original designer of it. And the son, at the launch of the Brooklyn Bridge, at the opening of it, was on a ship, and got his foot caught between the ship and the dock, and it crushed his foot, and eventually he got gangrene and he died from it. Right? It was a very tragic thing. But the father, who was the original designer of it, I forget his name. You can look at it, Google it. You find that after his injury, he never came out to the bridge at all. He lived in Brooklyn Heights, and he would observe the building of the bridge through binoculars. He was a Civil War, I think, colonel, and he'd been an engineer in the Corps of Engineers. Right? And he would observe everything that was being done to build the Brooklyn Bridge. And each night, his wife would come and leave messages for the foremen of different departments of the bridge to say, you should be doing it this way, and you should be doing it that way, right? And he would write them down, but he couldn't travel. He couldn't go out. He wasn't well. Right? So he would sit there and watch this, right? And so they never got to meet him once the injury happened. But so even though if you don't meet the designer, you can get a sense of what he wants, especially if he leaves a communication for you. Our designer did. It's called the Torah and the Prophets. He goes from there to discover his role in mankind. The rainbow reminds all of mankind of the destructiveness of sin and the events that took place when society corrupted itself beyond the possibility of redemption. So one's a very positive sign, one's a very negative sign. The remaining pair match the first two. Bris Milah, circumcision, is to the Jews what Shabbos is to mankind. Milah reminds the Jews of their special calling to establish a holy community and the need for self-limitation and restraint, without which this goal is unattainable. The prohibition of the Jews eating the gid hanashe, the sciatic nerve, ensures that we Jews do not forget an important historical event and parallels the more universal lessons of the rainbow appearing in the sky, because he was fighting evil. Just why is the episode of Yaakov's wrestling match and his subsequent injury, which healed quite nicely of its own accord shortly after, so worthy of remembrance? Right? We do not ban chametz and insist on eating matzah once a year merely to remind ourselves of the dietary laws of Pesach. Somehow, just the gid nashe, there's not much of an explanation for it, but Hirsch has found what he considers to be the answer to this. It says, the ban on eating the gid nashe must allude to some great momentous truth as well. It's too significant. It's the end of the battle with the angel of evil. Right? He's injured. Right? When Yaakov walks, or rather limps away from his encounter with Esav the angel, he is deficient, but only temporarily. His leg is whole, his muscles are intact, the tendon is there, and yet they don't function together because it's the nerve that's injured. Right? It's a very interesting thing, because he could have hurt the muscle or the bone, right? But hurting the nerve is a very interesting thing, because all the other functions can exist, but the nerve is actually the thing that kind of connects the information, that transfers the information. If you don't have nerves on your fingertips, you can put your hands on a hot stove. It doesn't hurt. Right? So it says that his whole leg, his muscles are intact, the tendons are there, yet they do not function well together as they should. Yaakov has assumed the role of a noshe, which is formed by the same letters as neshe, as in gid and neshe. Noshe is a creditor who seems to lose his money by lending it to another. In truth, however, the creditor has not lost anything at all. What he gave willingly. In place of what he gave, he now stands an obligation. Right? So when you lend money, it's not as though you don't have the money. Right? You've lent it to somebody else, it will come back to you. Right? God willing. So he hasn't lost anything. What he gave willingly, and in its place now stands an obligation which one day will be collected. Yaakov lost something, his physical strength and power, but he will lay claim to something much greater as a result of the loss. Through the long night, Yaakov struggled with Esav's angel. Yaakov remains unvanquished. He is not even thrown to the ground, limp and paralyzed with helplessness. Yaakov is slowed by his injury, which does not allow him to even stand firmly on 2 feet, let alone move without restriction. Yaakov did not come to this encounter with his brother exuding strength and vigor. He's about to face Esau now, and he's in a weakened state. It's, in principle, the worst way he could arrive. Esau arrived at the head of an army of 400 armed men, loyal to him. Yaakov could not even marshal the force of his own body to present himself as an image of strength and vigor. So it would be during the long night of our exile. We would not be beaten down, but we would not be allowed to move about easily or unmolested. We would survive, but we would lack standing in the community of nations. We would move with small, uneasy steps, rather than brisk, confident stride. It may seem to be undesirable to arrive at a long-anticipated encounter with a physical disability, but it actually helped. It helped Esau to understand something about his brother who stood before him. Yaakov could become identified with divine assistance precisely because he could not compete with others with his own resources. Yaakov would not be defeated, but the source of his strength was not within him, but in his relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, with God. Esau understood on some level that Yaakov was not the master and source of his good fortune and his very survival. Something higher stood before him. So because of Yaakov's weakness, Esau understood that there was a much greater strength behind him. Jews throughout history would take notice of their material weakness and accept it, rather than bemoan their plight. Sitting down to eat, they did it without the Gid Hanasha, which willingly renounced the strength they might have had, realizing that in giving it up, they gave up nothing of value. Their strength would come from their connection to God. If they kept it strong and vital, they would be buoyed by Him, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When they stumbled, it was not because they lacked strength, but because they lacked God's assistance. They would understand that the very weakness that others found contemptible was a vehicle to ultimately help them understand their protector and thus fulfill their mission in history. That it's very easy for a tremendously powerful man, physically powerful man, to be an intimidating person. Right? It's not so easy for, a smaller, weaker person to do it. And yet, it's a very interesting thing. The Jews have always been a small people, a weak people militarily. Not always, but through most of our history. We've not had any military power at all. And yet, we're constantly described as this tremendous, you ask people in Mexico, how many Jews are there in Mexico? They'll tell you a third of the country is Jewish. It's like 1%, right? Somehow, this very tiny group of people, right, continues to have a unique power that threatens much greater nations. Right? It seems not to make sense, right? That we are this Yaakov, this injured Yaakov. We limp through history, and everybody's scared of us, right? And attacks us because of it, right? And even, today's news, it's bizarre news. This thing at the UN, that, now they've got their recognition for whatever they wanted, right? Because Israel, Israel just wants to survive. They just want to do their job. They have no designs, on Egypt and Syria. Over and over and over, it's the same lesson. The day that our enemies put down their weapons is the day there will be peace. And the day we put down our weapons is the day that we will be destroyed. And somehow we're portrayed as Goliath in the story. It's quite remarkable. But this is actually the whole point. It's Esau recognized, that Yaakov's power was not the same kind of power he had, of physicality. It was something that was much more from his point of view, much more dangerous. You know. So, with those thoughts, we should all remember our power, use it wisely, and it should help to bring Mashiach before Hanukkah comes. We can all enjoy Hanukkah with Mashiach and the base Mikdash rebuilt.
Amen.